We have interpretation in Spanish for all of you, so make sure that you can find the Spanish channel, the interpretation. We're going to start in just 1 minute, and we're waiting for other colleagues to join. Please, while we are waiting for our colleagues, you can introduce yourself on the chat box. You can add your organization and where are you joining, where are you located. Have more people coming. We are 42. Thank you, Enrique, for introducing yourself. So we have people from India. Good morning, you guys. People from Paraguay, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Puerto Rico, London. All over the world. From Zimbabwe, we have people from Africa, from Latin America. We are wait 1 minute more. Morning in Brazil, California, France. So I think we're ready to start. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this introduction to the gender equality concepts in food systems, land use and restoration. The interpretation is available, so you can find it in your Spanish channel. If you haven't done it already, please introduce yourself on the chat box, your organization, where are you based, so we can know who's joining us today. This session is recorded. My name is Sandra Andraca, and we will be together for the next 90 minutes, and together with my colleagues, Alexandra Taya and Carlota Grillo, we are the FACS community team, and we are going to deliver this first course of the FOLUR Gender Learning Programme. This is a FACS community FOLUR event, and we have two wonderful women who will be the main speakers of this session. Agustela Nini-Pavli, Estela. She's the gender consultant of the UNDP's Food and Agricultural Commodity System, and Patricia Kristjanson, Patty. She's the senior gender agricultural system and forest landscapes specialist and consultant on as environmental and the agricultural global program, the FOLUR Global Rank. So this is an introductory course. It's a part of the FOLUR program, the FOLUR System Land Use and Restoration Program. But you will see that the concepts and the knowledge that we will be sharing here is also applicable for any other projects that are related to gender responsive interventions in agriculture. And so welcome to all of you who have joined from other programs and the FACS community. And we hope that we can become more familiar with key gender concepts, also to understand the basic requirements for gender-targeted and gender-responsive interventions, and become aware of why it's important to address gender equality as part of sustainable land use and restoration and food system development. And yes, Pat is saying it's amazing to see so many people joining today. So in order to do that, we are going to have an agenda. We have an agenda prepared for you. Carlota, can you share the agenda, please? You have it? Okay. Oh, yeah, thank you very much. So we have the introductions. Stella will share some of the results of the survey that you filled for this course. She will also introduce the key gender equality concepts. We will use Menti, so have your iPhone handy to do a quiz, a quick quiz. We have a session for questions and answers, and then Patty will introduce the benefit of gender responsive approaches, and we will go to breakout groups. For those who prefer to be in a group speaking Spanish, please say on the chat box and say that you will want to join. You can add the word Español, and we will try to put you in a breakout group that we will speak in Spanish. And yeah, good afternoon, people joining from Nepal. And then, yeah, we have the wrap up. So we try to have an interactive session. You can write your questions on the chat box in English and Spanish. And we try to translate for those who speak Spanish, we translate the question in English. So without further delay, Estela, the floor is all yours.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. I'm very pleased to be here today in this gender equality training, and I'd like to thank the FACS team for organizing this event, Sandra, Pascal, Alexandra, and Carlota, as well as Patty, with whom we worked together for the training, for developing and delivering this this training. If you recall, when you registered for the training, you had to fill out a pre-course survey, and we received a good number of responses, which have been very useful in informing the information, the material that we're sharing with you today, but they will also be very useful for the future training courses in the framework of the FOLUR program. And we notice from the participants that we have a diverse group of colleagues working in different areas and different projects, including from FOLUR, but not necessarily only FOLUR. As Sandra mentioned, FOLUR stands for Food System, Land Use, and Restoration. So when we're referring during our presentation to FOLUR areas, we mean these three main areas. Going back to the survey, the results showed that most of you have some good knowledge of gender equality issues, and you are planning to or already are including gender empowerment and the participation of women and other disadvantaged communities and groups in the activities of your programs, which is very encouraging. And we really hope that this training will help all of you expand more or deepen your knowledge and understanding on gender equality issues. And we also hope that through this first introductory training and then the other ones following, we'll be able to address some of the challenges, to discuss and address some of, not finding solutions, but suggesting solutions for some of the challenges that you point out in your efforts to integrate gender in your work. Before starting with the presentation, we'd like to, as Sandra mentioned, we have prepared sort of a warm-up exercise, some short quiz that just help us reflect. There are just a couple of questions that help us reflect on the status of gender equality worldwide and in relation to agriculture. the responses will be anonymous. And this is not a competition, it's just for fun. let's put it this way. So if you could share, I don't know, Sandra or Carlota with sharing the Menti question, that would be great.
Yes, in a minute, yeah. Alexandra is sharing the Menti. So you have to join the link over there in Menti, and you have to add this code, and we will have the opportunity to do this quick quiz. Be gentle, Estela, with all of us, with the quiz. So the people are joining the Menti. We have 10 people. Yeah, you can click on the heart to let us know that you are there. And make sure to add the code. We have 23 people. Maybe we can wait 30 seconds more, Estela, and we are ready to start.
I need to see the results. I don't know, are they going to be shared on the screen?
Alexandra, will we?
Yes, we will be sharing them as we go.
Okay.
I think people are still joining. Maybe we have 36 people already there, Estela, 37. I think once we have 40 people, we are ready to start.
Okay.
$38. Okay, I don't know if our colleagues are having problems. 39, yeah.
Yeah, if we have 40, it gives of the.
Okay, so let's go. We are ready.
Results.
Okay.
How many years will take to achieve full gender equality at the current rate of progress? 50 years, 100 years, 300 years, or 400 years? So yeah, it's 300 years it will take with the current pace of progress in removing gaps in legal protection and removing discriminatory laws. This is according to the latest UN Women Gender Snapshot on the progress towards SDG 5, Sustainable Development Goal number 5 on gender equality. So based on the data that we currently have on the pace of progress, a sort of a calculation on the projection is made, and according to this, it will be around 300 years to achieve full gender equality. Yeah, it's not very optimistic. Question 2. What percentage of the world's agricultural land is owned by women? %, 15%, 30%, or 50%? Yeah, it's 15%. It's a bit more optimistic and promising that the majority had guessed, so that is not as bad. This is according to FAO data, and in some parts of the world, like in North Africa and Near East, the situation is even worse, with around 5% of women be owning agriculture land. We can move to the next question. What is the global share of women in agriculture, forestry, and fishing in employment, approximately? This is the data is also coming from FAO. And yes, here the majority has guessed right. It's around 37%. And mainly in agriculture only, it's even higher because this includes, I mean, fishing as well. So fishery as well. So in agriculture is around 43%. And the final question. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women includes a specific provision on the rights of rural women. Is this true or false? Yes, this is true. 22 people are aware of this, and this is very good. And we're going to have a chance to discuss briefly about this specific provision later in the presentation. Thank you very much. So you get for those that maybe are not very familiar with gender issues in agriculture, but I suppose most of you are, you get a general idea of the situation of gender inequalities is worldwide. So if you, Carlota, if you could please share the presentation, I'd like to continue. Next slide. And as Sandra mentioned, if you have questions or reflections, you can write them in the chat box. Unfortunately, because this is a very big group of people, we may not have the opportunity to hear your questions, but then during the discussion groups, maybe there we can also discuss these questions. So this is course 1, which is an introduction. It discusses generally the gender equality concepts in the context of land use, food and agriculture commodity systems, whereas 2 more specific and more in-depth courses will be following throughout this year and next year on gender in integrated landscape management systems and restoration activities, as well as gender and sustainable food and agriculture systems. And we would really appreciate towards the end of this course or through a post or survey, if you could indicate your interest or areas that you'd like to hear more in course 2 and course 3. Next slide, please. Course 1, I'll be starting with discussing some key gender equality concepts, which is basically some information to help us reflect on the status of gender equality in these areas, or rather gender inequalities actually. Whereas in section 2, Patty is going to discuss some tools, practical tools that can be used in development programs to help address gender inequalities. Next slide, please. So the first question that comes to our mind is, why is gender relevant to FOLUR areas, to these areas? And naturally, it is because both women and men make crucial contribution in agriculture, but women's roles often is not recognized and it's not valued. It does not get the attention it deserves. Many gender gaps exist in many countries that do not enable women to participate and to benefit equally from interventions being implemented. And this is why this requires a specific focus on our part, professionals working in these areas, to really understand what's going on, what keeps women away from benefiting from these interventions and projects. We shared with you before, when you registered for this course, some materials, some definitions of gender equality concepts. And these are very important concepts. They are basic concepts actually, but they help us identify what are the specific challenges and needs, and what opportunities that we can have to address them. Next slide, please. And in this training, what we'll be trying to do is to sort of discuss these general gender equality concepts in the context of agriculture. So basically trying to apply them in our everyday work in this sector. For example, gender roles is an important concept which has to do with informal social attributes and responsibilities that women and men are expected to occupy in agricultural work based on their sex. Gender roles, they vary across different societies, cultures, and regions. But historically, agricultural work has been divided along gender lines with distinct roles for women and men. And these roles influence the division of labor and responsibilities within the household, in value chains, and decision-making processes. However, it is important to note that gender roles in agriculture are not fixed, they are not universal, and they can change over time. And they often are conditioned and depend on household structure, whether a woman is the head of a household or not, access to resources, global economy, conflicts, disasters, and other factors. Next slide, please. And in fact, the difference between what people do does not necessarily produce gender inequalities. It's rather the unequal gender relations created by these roles that influences how women and men interact with each other, including how power and resources are divided between them. In many societies, men have more power and control over resources compared to women and others with diverse gender identities. And this creates per se inequalities and discrimination, as well as hierarchical structure within societies. Therefore, to develop effective agricultural technologies, initiatives, policies, it's important to understand the status of different gender roles and their relations in the specific context of your work, in the area of your work, at both micro and micro level, at the household level and the value chain level, at the policy level. However, it's important to note on a positive note that gender roles and relations in agriculture they are changing, and there is more and more awareness and recognition on the need to challenge traditional norms and promote gender equality. And we are all aware of multiple programs being implemented around the world throughout the years that have had an important positive impact on challenging traditional gender norms and promoting gender equality in agriculture. Next slide, please. So gender roles that we discussed that lead to unequal power relations are actually the root of the problem. Gender inequalities and discrimination are the manifestation of the problem. Gender inequalities are differences in access to opportunities based on gender, and they are widespread, whereas gender discrimination has to do with disadvantaged treatment, often individual or a group of individuals based on gender. And discrimination could be based on gender, but also on other factors such as race, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, and other grounds. So both concepts are very close to each other. They are interconnected. It's important to understand, to remember that gender equality is a human right, and gender discrimination violates that right. Discrimination could be direct, indirect, or multiple discrimination. Direct is straightforward when the law explicitly prohibits women doing certain things or doing jobs, certain jobs, or owning property, for example. Whereas indirect discrimination is sort of more subtle. It's a practice or a policy in which applies to everyone in the same way. It's meant to apply to everyone in the same way. But then it has a different impact on certain groups in this case that we're discussing on women. For example, a bank requiring a full-time job to grant a loan or land as a collateral, or for example, a school that is quite far from a village, and the girls risk or feel insecure, or for them takes a long time to go to that school, which makes practically inaccessible education for these girls. So there are many examples of indirect discrimination. And multiple discrimination, we touched upon it briefly above. It's when gender intersects, meets with other grounds of discrimination, such as race, disability, ethnicity, which makes it even more difficult for women and girls from this group access to opportunities and resources, including in the agriculture sector. Next slide, please. So these are some questions for reflection. You don't need to answer, you just have a look and think about them. How is the situation in your country in terms of politics, in terms of economics, legislation, even in your own household, who does most of the domestic work? So it's just some questions for us to reflect on the status of gender inequalities and discrimination in our everyday life. And you can obviously comment and reflect on these questions in the chat box if you're willing to. Just giving a couple of minutes to reflect on them. Okay, yes.
Stella, can you read them in English so we have the interpretation in Spanish?
Okay. Okay. So politics, who is the leader of your country or birth residence? What is the percentage of women MP, members of parliament? More and more women now are getting a high leadership position in politics, and this is a very positive development, but unfortunately, it's not at the rate that we would like it to be. In many countries, women are far away from being very active in politics. Economics, do women and men earn the same in your country? What jobs do women mainly do? Especially the difference in pay, in wages is more pronounced in the private sector. It's important to stress that. Domestic sphere, who does most of the domestic work in your country? In legislation, are there laws specifically treating women and men differently? Are you aware? Gender discriminatory laws, usually it's women's rights organizations, women's rights groups and advocates that discuss about these laws, that raise these issues in the media or in discussions. And land, who owns land? Are there restrictions, formal or informal? Because there could be legislation that guarantees women equal rights to property, but then there are certain requirements in certain countries where land has to be registered under the name of the head of a household, thus restricting many women from managing or using the resources associated with land ownership. Next slide, please. So these are some of the most striking, I could say, gender inequalities and discrimination in food systems, starting with limited access to land that we discussed, which restricts women's ability to engage in productive agricultural activities and affects directly their economic empowerment. Unequal access to resources such as credit, inputs, technology, agriculture extension services, and this has a direct impact on productivity and competitiveness of women in the market and in the food system. Limited participation to decision making, it's also a major problem. Women not having sufficient voice in bodies or in meetings, in forums that decides about natural resources. So their voice and their priorities and needs are not being taken sufficiently into account. Gender wage gap, we touched upon this earlier. Women earning less than men. unpaid care work, which is a major problem. And just to know that these are inequalities and discrimination that are not only typical to food and agriculture. Obviously, they are pronounced. They are present in many areas of work. Unpaid care work, for example, women, they bear the disproportionate burden of unpaid care work, including household chores, childcare, taking care of the elderly, and so on, or persons with disability, and which limits their opportunities for other income generating activities and participation in broader food system activities. Limited access to markets and value chains is also an issue. Women face barrier in accessing markets and market information, transportation. They have transportation constraints and so on. As well as lack of representation in research and innovation. Women knowledge, experiences, and perspectives are often overlooked in agriculture, research, and innovation, leading to technologies and practices that do not pay sufficient attention to the needs and abilities of women. And these inequalities and discriminations are further enhanced or exacerbated by gender-based violence, for example, or lack of appropriate access to water, sanitation, electricity, healthcare, and other services that normally women are entitled to. Next slide, please. Sandra, can you just tell me how much time do I still have? So that
we are fine. You just still have like 5 minutes more.
Okay, 5 minutes. Okay.
Or more. I mean, we are fine with the time.
Okay. So inequalities and discrimination in agriculture and all other areas that we've been discussing are addressed or can be addressed through women's empowerment, which concerns them gaining power and control over their lives. Not only equal capabilities, women empowerment has to do not only with equal capabilities and access to resources, but also the agency, that is very important, the agency to use these rights and to make strategic choices and decisions about their life. In order to ensure women's empowerment, there are several conditions that range from reforming discriminatory laws, providing opportunities to women to exercise and gain power, expanding choices, increasing access and control over resources, transforming structures and institutions. Thank you. Next slide. So it's important to understand that these efforts to address gender inequalities and discriminations are grounded on a very solid international framework on gender equality, which is relevant to FOLUR areas of work. Among them, there are several legal and political policy instruments in this regard, but the most important and well-known is the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW Convention. This is a treaty which has been ratified by around 190 states. So, and the process means when a country ratifies a treaty, that means that this treaty becomes part of the internal legislation of the country. And the countries are required to implement the obligations and the legal provisions that are stipulated in this specific country, in this specific convention. CEDAW has a dedicated article. This was one of the questions that we raised earlier on the rights of rural women, which focuses on the specific concerns and rights of rural women, aiming to ensure their access to healthcare, education, economic opportunities, and active participation in decision-making processes, as well as addresses discriminatory practices and promoting gender equality in rural areas. Next slide, please. CEDAW, the convention, has a committee composed of independent experts And the CEDAW committee plays an important role. Actually, it plays two important roles. The first one is to provide guidance to states, general guidance, and to interpret specific provisions of the treaties. So basically, it's taking an article and breaking it down in concrete instructions from a legal point of view, but also a policy point of view on how states can implement the specific article. And the committee has a dedicated general comment, number 34, on the rights of rural women, which is very, very useful. I would strongly recommend to everyone who is interested in this area to have a look at it, because they touch upon many areas related to participation, economic and social life, land and natural resources, financial services, etc. Patty, in her presentation, will discuss as one of the starting point tools for gender mainstreaming, gender analysis. And for example, this general comment is a very useful guide that could be used in gender analysis. In addition, with specific recommendations that CEDAW committee sends to specific countries. Every country goes through a review of its implementation process of CEDAW convention every 4 years. And after the CEDAW committee reviews the country performance, it issues specific recommendations. And in all these recommendations, there is a very comprehensive and dedicated section on the rights of rural women. And these findings are an important instrument that can be used in the gender analysis as a point of reference, together with other tools that are recommended to. But for me, for example, as someone who works with human rights, the first starting point when working on or doing a gender analysis is to find the concluding observation that is called of that specific country, and then find there the area that you are interested. So they cover all areas related to gender equality. Yes, and next slide. And sustainable development goals, obviously, because gender equality is not only a fundamental human rights, but it's also a critical driver of sustainable development goals. The SDGs, as you may all know, are where they have a specific target, a goal on gender equality, but also other goals such as poverty reduction, food security, environmental sustainability, inclusive economic growth are related to gender equality. And in addition, they have specific targets and specific indicators on agriculture, and particularly on women's equal rights to economic resources, and especially land and other natural resources. And with this, I conclude my brief. This is a very, this would require a full training for hours in itself, but we tried our best to combine everything in a very short presentation, but we can share with you a longer version of this. And of course, in the FACS community, we could discuss more if you have questions especially about legal instruments and CEDAW concluding observations, which I feel like they've not been used sufficiently by practitioners. Because people perceive them as abstract legal documents sometimes, but this is not the case. Once you read them, they could be really very, very useful to guide your work, and especially in advocacy with the government partners, because in the end, the government is responsible to implement these obligations, and it's their duty to follow the CEDAW recommendations. So it's also an important advocacy tool. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. I haven't had any opportunity to look at the questions, but maybe with Patty, we can help, we can discuss. And
yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Stella. One question that came in that's a very good question is, why are women often not represented in agricultural research and innovation? And you know, it's true in most countries, and this obviously has some specificities by country, but you know, traditionally, and in fact, in many countries, women aren't even sort of recognized officially as farmers, right? Farmers are you know, are the head of household, they are the males, and it's acknowledged that women are doing farming work, but they're not considered farmers. And similarly in the forest world, you know, when I started looking at forestry groups and how forestry groups were working, it was a very similar situation that women often were not. But we'd like to hear more from you about your experiences. And importantly, as we go forward in these courses, we're going to be talking and diving deeper into some of the things we can do to address those. So we can ask why a lot, and we can say, you know, there's diagnostics out there that say all these constraints are happening. But to me, the real key question that we can all start tackling together is, what are those things that we can be doing in our projects and programs and in helping governments address these, you know, they're very widespread issues, and they offer key opportunities. So please keep putting your questions in the chat. Pascal noted it would be great to post, and we should do this as soon as possible in the FACS community, the recent conclusions of the CEDAW committee on the gender equalities in agriculture for the 27 FOLUR countries. So the Food Systems Land Use and Restoration Program, I should mention, is, yeah, we've got a really unique opportunity. We are working in 27 countries on 8, you know, the biggest food commodity value chains. So we are going to be an important part of generating some of the evidence that is still missing on the importance of tackling these issues in the context of restoration, food systems, transformation approaches. Luana also mentioned that, you know, the issue of informal sector, which is a very good point to raise. That the thing about agriculture, forestry, for example, is it often is jobs that are in the informal sector. So you can have good laws for people working in the formal sector, but if the women are largely working in the informal sector, for example, that presents additional challenges. Stella, do you want to comment on any of those?
Yeah, inspired by the question why women are not involved in technology, and it's like a broader question. And I think we had that asked by one of participants in the pre-training survey, why women are hesitant sometimes even to participate in project activities, for example, or initiatives. And we don't have a straight answer to that. It's our job as practitioners to find out why women are not willing to participate. And this is possible through this gender analysis, which is a very practical tool. And the gender analysis starts with focus group discussions and interviews with women, and could be done at the policy level, at the project level, but also at the activity level. Sort of trying to figure out what impedes women from participating. Is it the fact that due to harmful traditional norms, they are not allowed by husbands, by men, to go and to participate in these events? So we need to work with husbands as well. Is it because they are so burdened by the other work that they have to do at home that they do not have time? They are exhausted. So we need to discuss and to coordinate with other projects that are taking place. This is also an important aspect that we need to see, to sort of coordinate and liaise with ongoing projects on gender equality, because we cannot achieve or everything through a specific program on agriculture to ensure that women are empowered in all areas. So it's very important that we have to coordinate and to be aware of other ongoing projects in this area in order to maximize resources and to find solutions that about reasons that keep women away from participating. Yeah. Or you can also bring your own examples as well from your work, because if you're practitioners working directly with women, you have even more insights on the reasons and the ways on how to address these challenges.
Okay.
Patti, we have time for, if there are any other questions, we have time.
Okay, I'm seeing one from Malika. What approach could we, in the sense of NGOs, governments, other institutions, use to recognize working home as farming for rural women, since women do contribute to crop production? Stella, do you have familiarity with the concept of the working home? So it's a good question, Malika, and I'd be curious.
It has to do with unpaid care work, right? If I'm wrong, unpaid care work of women. Yes, I mean, this is a major problem, and this is not only in agriculture. It's about recognizing, valuing the work that women do at home, taking care of the house, taking care of the children, taking care of the elderly, and there is no recognition or whatsoever. There are efforts to sort of value this kind of work, but in many countries there are not adequate policies, and this is a major issue. And one way it could be done, that is through social assistance, social support network, that women can be compensated through social security systems for the unpaid work that they do. But this has to do with policy decision making and changing and reforming legislation in this area. And it's a very fair question, and it doesn't apply only to agriculture, right? It applies to all sectors. But it's important because it takes a great time from women's everyday life and leaves them with very limited option and opportunities to invest in their development, professional development. In the case of agriculture, to participate, for example, in extension trainings, to pursue education, etc. One way, for example, is the government has responsibility to provide the childcare support, for example. Whenever childcare support is provided, this is a great relief for women to sort of lessen the burden that they have. Or social care, social services for elderly and persons with disabilities that they have to care. But this is a very complex problem, and there is not like an answer and solution, but there are different ways that governments are trying to tackle. But recognizing it is also very important, because many governments do not even recognize it as an issue, and it's far away in their social policies agenda.
May I?
Of course, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this issue of unpaid work, I mean, this has been discussed for decades in most countries across the world, right? And across all sectors and industry. I mean, do we actually know of any single country that has started to tackle these issues of unpaid work in a meaningful manner? Maybe the Nordic are a bit advanced, I don't know. Do we know anyone? Do we have any good example? It's not a question to Patti or Stella, it's a question to everyone.
Yeah. Well, I have an Icelandic heritage, and I know Iceland's a leading country. But it's a good question. Can I just put in a couple of other observations that have been made in the chat while we have a chance? Oh, now I'm losing them. The finance issue has come up from Matt Reddy. You know, the inequalities compounded by access to finance, and the observation that women are often farm finance managers. Well, in some parts of the world, in many parts of the world, they are very illiterate in bookkeeping, etc. And that's one of the technical trainings that is often sought by women to learn more basic, farm management, finance skills. So it's nice to see from Yasmin working on an initiative in Africa on that. Argentina pays women who stay at home. That's great. We had a wonderful example from Mexico. The FOLUR project in Mexico is incorporating childcare into they're bringing women and men to technical trainings, but to get the women really coming and involved, they realized they had to take on the childcare challenge, and it was a bit of a challenge, and they've tried different ways of doing it, and they had to get other people involved and helping them. But it significantly increased the ability of women to come and get these technical trainings in finance and other things. So I liked, we can be thinking about taking on some of the additional challenges women have because of children or housework, etc. And sometimes it takes some creativity. Okay, Sandra, do we have to move on now?
Yes, we have time, we can move on. There is a question from Dieter also in the chat box. I don't know if we have time to respond that. We have 2 or 3 minutes more.
Dieter, what are the most practical things an agribusiness can do to increase gender equity in their supply chains? You want it all in one question, do you?
Nothing complicated, just yeah.
Well,
No,
I
was
would say,
wondering if anyone had like, this reference is great. I was just looking through it. Thanks.
Yes, no, and in fact, I am very encouraged. I've been talking to different agribusinesses that are really taking this seriously now. And they realize that they've been doing gender issues in the workplace. So the, equal pay, safety issues for women working in plantations, et cetera, things like this. But they're increasingly looking to what other initiatives and actions they can take to empower women, and not just women, but others that are agricultural workers, for example. So, the real answer is there's a lot of practical things. And I hope some of the resources that we point to, can give you some ideas. And I will try to, in the forum for our group, maybe try to pull some of those together into a list. That would be a very useful thing to do, I think. Thanks for that question.
And if I may just add that in order to find out the practical things in agro-businesses, you first need to start sort of analyzing what are the gender inequalities that need to be addressed. So that's why we said that these gender inequalities and gender norms are not homogeneous. They depend on the context, on the culture, on the situation, on the economic development of a certain country. So there is always a need to, you cannot address gender inequality without sort of identifying what are the major gaps, because they could be very different from one place to another, from one area to another. So this is, and the tools that Pat is gonna discuss about help with this, identifying the inequalities and addressing them.
Great. Thanks for the observations that are coming up, and yeah, the issue of sustainability standards has been raised in the chat, and it would be really good for all of us to read this report on how agri-food members are integrating gender into their standards and programs. And FOLUR, one of the things we're doing in FOLUR is talking about a women's empowerment standard. And I encourage you all to look at those materials. It's called W+. So I can put the link in the chat in a second. That is an exciting way of thinking about how these projects, programs, and private sector governments can empower women in their activities. Okay, I think we should move on to the next set of slides because we want to get to the group chat where we're going to get into small groups and talk to each other a bit more about these issues. I feel like there's a lot of knowledge in this group, and so we are going to move pretty quickly. So could we have the next set of slides, Carlotta? Thank you so much. Okay, so why do we worry about gender mainstreaming in these kinds of projects? I mean, these are not gender projects per se that we're talking about. We're talking about agricultural landscape, forest landscape, projects and programs, food systems, transformation projects. So why, do we care about gender? And the whole idea of gender mainstreaming is that it's an overall approach. It's a way of thinking, okay? It aims to integrate gender perspectives and considerations into all stages of our policies, programs, and projects. And the bottom line is we all have the opportunity to tackle gender discrimination and promote gender equality. And why? Well, there's a lot of reasons why, equality and equity being, amongst them. But I would argue for all of us, one of the most important reasons is we can enhance our results and impacts if we do this, full stop. So if you think about it like that, you can get over a little bit of the, why, this is a big thing. This is gender, cultures, and norms. They take decades to change. And you know what? No, they don't always. They can change very rapidly. And we all have examples in our own life. And the differences from, my mother, my grandmother, etc., are pretty staggering. So things are changing and we can help them. Next slide, please. One way of thinking it is targeting interventions. So looking at dedicated interventions that focus on specific gender gaps and challenges. So addressing a key gender challenge, the main goal of the intervention. Farmers field schools, women's farmers field schools do this. They recognize that women were not being involved in accessing the farmer field school approach as much as they should be. So they changed the approach to really target them. In Ethiopia and other places, they are using land certificates that women can sign, both women and men, or just women. And this tackles the whole land tenure insecurity for women issue. So it's targeting a specific issue. There's also more integrated approaches and what we can think of as gender responsive approaches. For example, these are inclusive, participatory community resource mapping and other integrated land use management approaches. I was working with the Maasai in Kenya years ago, and the men were barely involved in land use planning in their area, much less the women. And we started doing the GPS that we did participatory land use mapping of their communities. And we trained people, and not just men, also women. And it just changed the game. Not only did the Maasai start having a real voice in land use management decisions for their area, the women were also involved. Next slide, please. So we know that gender disparities persist. I don't even think I have to repeat this. I think Stella covered this very well. But in our context, it is about access and control over land and other water resources, forest, community lands, and most importantly, the decision-making processes around them, okay? That women are often, IPs, Indigenous peoples are often excluded from such decision-making forums. So that is important to tackle. And once again, gender mainstreaming is not so complicated. It's really a lot about just being conscious of and taking actions to address these disparities, to get at those gaps, as we call them. Next slide, please. So what are some examples? And I want to hear from all of you, some examples of things you are doing to take actions to address these access to resources. Okay, so one example is not making land ownership a precondition for access to credit or inputs. And there's examples around the world of projects that have done that, and it increases the involvement and the access of women to credit. For example, when you involve the women in the development of appropriate technologies and not just the men, they start asking for different kinds of seeds, different kinds of technologies. When you get direct payments to women planting trees or running tree nurseries, doing restoration work, in Kenya, it's an M-Pesa system. They get a payment right on their cell phone. That was an absolute game changer for the women planting trees and running tree nurseries. In terms of training and capacity strengthening, providing opportunities to women and men in sustainable ag practices. As we mentioned earlier, financial management, marketing looms large. Getting them to shift into more formal marketing and higher up the value chain. It takes specific strategies, and I'd like to hear some of the strategies you're taking to do that. One of the things we're trying to do with this group is document and share more widely what are these good examples of practices. So tailoring the trainings, again, as was mentioned earlier, to specific needs and constraints women face. That has to do with timing often. It has to do with the location, whether women are hearing about the meetings, the trainings, the program benefits that are available to them. They often don't even hear about them. So getting creative on communication. Safety issues loom large often for women, and transport issues. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through specific tools for gender mainstreaming or gender analysis, let's say, because that's where you start, is with the gender analysis. But we are sharing on the FACS site the different kinds of gender analysis tools that are out there. Okay, they basically look at identifying, the areas where inequalities, discrimination, specific challenges are. They look at actions to address them, and the participatory work with communities that is very inclusive and very involving of different groups. They can identify the actions themselves. It's really important. So that's why getting them involved is key, because it's really the people on the ground that are going to uncover the opportunities to see more leadership of women, for example. Next slide, please. So again, in a nutshell, what you want to think about for your projects and programs is starting with analysis, leading to actions, leading to indicators. And we have resources available to share with you that talk about, the different analytical tools, the different, a lot of examples of in agriculture and forest landscape projects and programs, actions that can be incorporated, and specific indicators, because you want to be able to capture and measure the impacts. Okay, next slide. And I said impacts, but actually what we really want to look at and measure is changes in outcomes. And that is basically changes in behavior, okay? An outcome is a change in behavior by an institution, by a person, by a group, by a government agency. So if you think about some of the outcomes, gender-related outcomes we want to achieve first, and work backwards to what actions have to happen to get to those outcomes, it's a very powerful approach, because we often do, and I know the research world does it the other way. We develop wonderful technologies, etc., and then we say, okay, we're going to get it out to the world. Who's going to use it? But you really want to start flipping it to look at these gender specific outcomes, for example, and then how do we empower women through our activities? So a specific example about that is creating a WhatsApp group, for example, that can link women and empower them throughout a commodity value chain. There's a wonderful example in Ghana of in relation to a Red Plus project that is doing this. And what it achieved, just a simple WhatsApp group, is that the people at the national level were linked to the project people on the ground. And there's often a sort of lack of communication between different levels like that. And you can really empower people by tackling that. Next slide. Okay, monitoring and evaluation is key. Again, we want to measure these so you can get more resources. I can share them with you on gender indicators and why they're important, how we need to incorporate the measurement of these things. Okay, I won't dwell on this one. Next slide, please. So organizational change is really important. I think you probably all have examples within your own organizations, how we have to start with our own organizations. Government agencies all over the world need to make a significant progress in this area. So institutionalizing, thinking about changes within organizations, institutions, groups, developing capacity, assigning roles and responsibilities to achieve gender equality for all personnel in organizations is critical. For our project teams, it absolutely means thinking about the budget, okay? Proper budget planning for specific gender responsive interventions is essential. And I can't tell you how many times people look for additional money at the end to do some gender responsive interventions when they needed to be thinking about it right from the beginning of the budgeting process. Next slide, please. So now we want to get to talking a little bit more about what challenges you are facing in applying gender responsive approaches in your projects programs. I'd like you to you'll get assigned a group, you'll go into a group and you'll tackle these two questions in the next 20 minutes. What challenges are you facing and what information would help you most? We are going to be developing and targeting as well as we can to your needs the next two courses. So this is going to help us figure out what information and you've already provided some in the chat already. I've seen some examples of where we could really provide you some very targeted information. Again, that there's wonderful things happening at the ground level in small groups and women's, groups, and you can find examples all over the world of this. But then they're not getting the support and the integration up to the higher levels and the scaling challenge. So we do have a bit of a gap there, and I think it's going to be really good to hear about strategies to deal with this. I think there are more communication related strategies. There's more capacity and training challenges that we can all take on. And I really want to bring together more examples of what's working where. So please continue to share those. They're going to be very valuable, and we will try to pull them together and share them very, very widely. So please continue to just send me an email, come on the site. We're going to have a forum in the FACS for this dialogue to continue. So thanks so much, you guys. That was really great.
Estela, 30 seconds for you.
Yeah. So I'm trying not to repeat the things. Budget came across as an important, and Sanola, actually, I'm sorry that we couldn't hear, but she made a comment, a suggestion in the chat that it's very important and we need to take it into account. Another important issue was a lack of gender sensitive guidelines for people who working with women in the field who need to be trained, and there is a need for specific guidelines on how to approach women for people who do not have a gender background. The need to collaborate with other ongoing projects in other areas related to women's economic empowerment, addressing gender-based violence was also raised as an important issue. So we do not work in silos, but we ensure collaboration and maximization of resources, because a simple project cannot achieve its results without other things that are already being done. So it's important factor. Yes, I tried to summarize as much as I could, but there was a very variety of interesting discussions, and I hope we will have the chance to go deeper into this in other trainings. Thank you.
And thank you. Well, in my group, yeah, we talk about the challenge of working with indigenous cultures and to respect the culture, and at the same time to introduce and work with the gender perspective, and also the lack of data that there are in the rural areas about gender, and also about the need of knowing other projects who are having this experience with childcare, and also to know projects who have been successful in sharing experience with gender approach. And yes, and the lack of data, the lack of good indicators on how to measure. So there are many things that we will that we collect and we can address in the next trainings. And just to wrap up, let you know that we will be sharing the recording. We will be sharing the presentations. More course training are coming in October and at the beginning of next year about gender in integrated landscapes management systems and restoration initiatives, and also in sustainable food and agricultural systems. And we have, I don't know, Alexandra, we have time for the survey now, or we will send it by email with the post-event email. Right.
We can post it in the chat box and we will send it as well in the email.
Okay, thank you. So if you have time, please help us filling up this survey. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we will be sharing all the information, and stay tuned. We will continue the conversation on the FACS community digital platform. Thank you for joining. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thanks, Estela, and thanks, interpreters.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.